Thank you very much, and good evening, Board, and thank you for the opportunity to present this. As acknowledged, this has been presented in a number of places, and yet tonight is time for us to share the detail with the community. I want to thank my colleagues at the executive level in this district for not only all of the work that they've done to help lead focus groups and task force groups to bring this together, but also for putting up with listening to this report maybe 25 times or so. And so I very much appreciate the opportunity to share it with you today. I call your attention, Board and community, to the fact that the Board gave me two primary goals this year, and those are listed before you. I won't read them to you, but one of them had to do with creating a couple of transition reports. This is the second of those this evening. The other has to do not with the creation of a strategic plan, but with the process and the timeline to yield a strategic plan in the future. This slide is important to me, so I'm going to spend just a moment making certain that many of the statements here are similar to what President Mayhew said, but I want to be very clear in the first paragraph here that the context that you're about to hear in these recommendations is not mine alone. It's been developed by many involved in task force groups. You know, in November, I basically reported to you what I had been hearing through interviews and focus group conversations, surveys, and I've been sharing with you the common themes that I was hearing. Underneath those common themes, our team members got to work and built out a number of recommendations that I'm sharing with you this evening. The second paragraph here is to note that, again, I'm not asking you to approve anything. You've asked for recommendations. I'm giving those to you, but a whole lot of action will have to occur after this evening to deal with the budget, committee structure, and so on. And then I just call your attention to the third item on this slide, which is that any time in this presentation you see an asterisk, a lot of times it's a little larger asterisk in the right-hand corner, but anytime you see an asterisk, it points out that in your packet, there's an addendum that goes along with the material that's presented on that slide. And so there are many, many pages for you to review. This slide just indicates that I'm at the timing for the year-end report. This is what we agreed to as an entry plan and transition report, and I'm at that point in time. We began the work after our November conversations with a review of our initiatives in this district. And in this case, board members and community, I'm specifically talking about achievement-related initiatives. I'm not talking about transportation or food service or buildings and grounds. You know, those things are all very, very important. But we wanted to make certain we understood the lens by which we're trying to move achievement forward. And so we talked about instructional methodology. We talked about student learning and programs that cross-cut many different areas that might deal with behavior on one side, but student behavior so that it can bring about heightened student achievement. And so we basically did this work for ourselves to say, what are the highest priority initiatives we have going on in this district at the district level as it relates to achievement. And we hope to use these documents as a bit of a filter for our future, because it's not uncommon for us to hear people suggest new things that we should try, new ideas to explore, and we have to remind ourselves that we have many, many things that are going on. Occasionally, we have to look at one of these and say it doesn't provide the return on investment that we thought it would and step away from it, and that's okay too. But I thought it was a good project and a good process that we went through to outline our highest priority initiatives. Now, board members and community, I'm going to share with you some recommendations and some action steps that are underway under four primary common thematic areas. These are areas that I shared with you back in November. They certainly came to the top as areas of great importance to this district moving forward. Those areas have to do, in no particular order, with student behavior. That's certainly what's in front of you right now, with human resources, with early childhood education, and with high school choice programs that are available, often referred to as the Career Academy or Focus programs in this district. And so I'm going to present to you a number of recommendations under each of those four outlined areas. As it relates to student behavior supports, I have to share, or I feel important to share with you that this was the most often mentioned item by our staff members. That if we're going to move things forward in this district, even if it's the graduation rate or student achievement, we have got to do more, especially coming out of the pandemic. with student behavior and the supports for student behavior. And you know, and you've been a partner in this work board, that we've already begun a great deal of work in this area. And so this slide outlines things we've already begun, because they don't require additional budgetary approval or board action, because you've already been involved in them. But I feel it important to outline it for the community. You know that we received a significant grant, multi-million-dollar grant, which allowed us to add counselors, to provide counselors at each elementary, which even more importantly, provided counselors in all LPS buildings for those supports for students. We then began work to reallocate liaison positions to provide restorative practices at each of our schools. Now, I want to just say a word about restorative practices. In the last 15 years or so, much of the work in public schools and in all schools that are working on behavioral programming are working on what we refer to often as an acronym, because that's what we do in education, but PBIS, or Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And so many districts around this nation, including Lincoln, have done the work necessary to acknowledge positive behavior when it occurs, to reward that, and with the notion that by rewarding positive behavior, we'll encourage more positive behavior. I think some districts, I'm not suggesting necessarily Lincoln, but some districts have fallen a little bit short by focusing so much on positive behavior that we forget that we are a teaching organization and we have students who are learning how to properly interrelate to one another, their peers, the staff members in the district, and we are always going to have to create a restorative practice, here's that term again, restorative practice to deal with the consequences of a negative behavior and to get that student back in the proper learning environment as soon as possible. So you're going to hear me say restorative practices a number of times this evening. We would like to place and have begun the work to place a restorative practice liaison in every one of our schools so that we're continuing our work on positive behavior, continuing our work to celebrate that, but doing the work we need to with restorative practices going forward. The third bullet on this slide is a student services supervisor to facilitate professional learning, including the learning about restorative practices. And of course, the fourth bullet's the same thing, but for a very specific group. We've got to go deep with our administrators. When we're talking student behavior, you know, it's interesting to me, board, that a lot of conversation I heard when I said, you know, how's the district going? How are we compared to what we were 20 years ago? And what can we do to do some really incredible things going forward? A number of people talked about the notion of accountability, but autonomy within accountability, and that we've got to, you know, allow for some site-based decisions and leadership. I think the one thing everybody seemed to agree that needed to occur in a consistent fashion district-wide, regardless of what facility you're in, had to do with student behaviors. We are a highly mobile community. What I mean by that is our students are moving all over Lincoln all the time. They're not leaving Lincoln. They're going from this building to that building. Consistency in student behavior matters, and these items are going to help us provide that. These first four that I've mentioned in particular. Bullets number 5 and 6 are really important, I think, for our future. It is time for us to get the cell phones and devices of that sort out of the instructional environment at the secondary school level. I think you're well aware that at the elementary school level, cell phones are not a part of the instructional day. They're not out during the day. If their student happens to have a cell phone in the elementary school, it's expected to be out of sight at all times. In the secondary schools, the cell phones have become such a distraction in some educational environments that we're going to have to take this work, put this work in to create consistent district actions so that the cell phones can be with and the devices can be with the students. And some teachers may choose to use the devices for instruction in a rare occasion, but I'm generally speaking of the fact that we will create and implement, we've already begun the work, district-wide consistent cell phone expectations for all secondary schools. We had a pilot program this year at Lincoln Southwest, started the year. That was going so well, we added a pilot program at Lincoln Northwest High School in January. That also went well. We were going to do that in 12 middle schools and 8 high schools next school year. The final bullet on this slide is the work we are doing to put cameras in each of the middle schools. You know that we have a fair number of cameras in the high schools. I want to be clear with the public on this. We're not talking about cameras in locker rooms, in bathrooms, even in instructional areas. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about cameras that would be placed in common spaces throughout our buildings for safety and security, hallways, commons areas, and even as I'm going to extend this middle schools just a little bit, even in a few rare occasions in some outside facilities owned by the district that have to do with athletics and activities, Seacrest Field, Beechner Field, those kinds of situations. And so we are moving forward with the board's blessing with the application or implementation of cameras in all of our middle schools and some of those other areas that I've mentioned. Some additional recommendations I would like to make this evening, board, related to growing the consistency and higher expectations of student behavior in this district have to do with, first of all, the creation and addition of an extra high school transition program. We have great programs in this district. And I want to call out, for example, I recently toured Yankee Hill. What a wonderful program for students that are finding challenge in the traditional setting, working on behavior, and doing so in a very safe and loving and academically progress-centered environment. But we've got to get more program spaces for students who may not be on IEPs or may not be in special education. And so we would like to add a second transition program at the 9 through 12 level. We've got one right now at Northeast High School. It's not specific to Northeast, and it's not only for students who attend Northeast. That's where it's housed right now. I want to be clear about that. It has nothing specific to do with Northeast. But we're going to need another one so that we can continue to make better behavior decisions moving forward. And the second bullet is directly related to that. We'll need staffing and curriculum and course offerings for the students that are placed in those programs. The third bullet, coming forward really came from our administrative team more than any other group, which is to invest in measures to promote safe learning environments at all times in our buildings. A couple of examples. One would be the work to do a hall pass using like their computerized device where we can do more to track who is requesting a hall pass, is it being approved or not, how many are in the hallway at any given time. This data is really important to us. And as you know, we have certain students that because of safety plans and whatnot need not be in the hallway at the same time unsupervised. And so this electronic hall pass software has come forward and it has become successful enough that we think it's time to consider that. Board members, 5 years ago at this time, we had about 140 instances of vaping across the district that we were dealing with at the end of the school year 5 years ago. Today, we're on our 600th incident for this school year alone. It's time for us to take some real work and put real work into mitigating the challenges of vaping in our school district to become a model for others, because we know that it doesn't matter what public, private school is out there. We know the challenges of vaping in society right now are significant. And we've got the blessing of some resources available to us through the settlement that occurred through the what many refer to as the JUUL settlement, J-U-U-L settlement, and we'd like to use some of those resources to put vape detectors and vape alerts throughout our buildings in the secondary schools. Finally, we're asking for a half-time school social work position to serve in early childhood, because obviously if we can do more to improve behavior before the students get into kindergarten, we're going to make better success going forward. The second area is probably the most often spoken about area I've heard in the community, which is that of early childhood education. I'm going to give you just some raw numbers to put it into perspective, particularly for the community. We have this really rough math, and it's not exacting in any way, but just to kind of get your hands around the size of the challenge that faces all of us in Lincoln right now. There are about 3,500 3-year-olds in town. There are about 3,500 4-year-olds in town. That's 7,000 students. We know that of those 7,000 students, because of our great partnership with, say, Lincoln Littles, in the room, by the way, represented in the room this evening, Suzanne's here, that 80% of the homes in Lincoln who have young children have all adults working outside the home. So it would stand to reason that with those 7,000 students at that age level, we're going to need about 5,600 seats available, affordable early childhood programming for them, full day, for those adults who are working outside the home. Right now, we have about 3,000 seats available, and the ones that we offer in the public schools are mostly half-day seats. And it's a good program. I'm not critical of our program at all. We're doing great things there. We just need more of it. And so we know that Lincoln Little's former program of Prosper Lincoln, which is now housed at the Community Foundation, is a great partner to us. We know that the Chamber of Commerce, I serve on their board as well, and they have stepped forward and said this is a workforce issue for this community as well. We've got to do more to get more access to affordable early childhood education in this community. And so, it is my hope, it is my desire that 5 years from now we're able to say, look, we really did something together and brought about more opportunities for our community and our young families in this area. And so I've begun to work with Lincoln Little's task force. We think that they would be a wonderful convener of this work, because LPS isn't going to solve this, but we have to be at the table when it gets solved. We have to be a part of the solution. We need the private providers, for-profit providers, agency providers, private school providers, public school providers, all working together to change Lincoln for the better in this particular area. The second bullet here is something I'm referring to as satellite preschool. In this case, we'd like to begin, as a recommendation to the board to consider later, we'd like to find a large company, something in town. I'm not indicating that we've already begun this work in a great deal of partnership ways, but think of something like a Kawasaki or a Lincoln Industries, where they would benefit by having early childhood education and preschool for their staff members' children, the people who work for them, for their workforce. We would like to consider working with them to develop, so that they could develop a site on their location or near their location that is appropriate, secure, safe, and has all of the requirements of law to be a preschool setting. And then we would come in, step in, and help them develop and implement an LPS preschool on their location. We've already begun working with our legal counsel to make certain that we can do this sort of work. And with the board's blessing, we'll begin to work on a partnership with at least one, if not more. I envision someday in the future where maybe a number of dental offices or attorneys' offices or insurance or whatever partner together so they can have their shared LPS site. Because really one of our challenges, of course, is personnel, but our biggest challenge we have right now is we can't double the size of our preschool programs. We just don't have the space for it. And if we can find ways to solve the space problems, I think we can do some good things for Lincoln. The final thing on this slide under early childhood is an additional teacher leader that we're requesting through the budget in the Department of Early Childhood, just to be a resource, not just for ourselves, but for any of those partners that I've talked about on this slide, to provide more training, more learning, and just to be a resource for others. Not forcing ourselves on others, but certainly available should they wish to have that. You heard me say in November that one of the most often things I heard talked about at the high school level was the fact that we've got these great programs, and we do. I am so proud. The more that I've learned about them, the more pride I have in the focus programs in this district, and I'm including the Career Academy as one of the largest focus programs, if you just think of that as a focus program as well. We have 11 standalone focus programs, whether you're talking about the program at the zoo or I don't want to, mention too many of them, or I'll skip one and offend somebody, but, the Bryan College focus program, certainly the aviation program that we're growing, and all of these. And then at our Career Academy out at the campus in partnership with Southeast Community, we've got 18 career pathways available to our students. When I put a task force together for the focus programs, I was pretty confident this task force was going to come back to me and say, here are the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 focus programs we need to start. That's kind of what I thought the task force would come back with. That's not what they came back with. They didn't come back with a recommendation for a great deal more programs right now. In the future, we've got some ideas for growing focus programs. What they came back with was the need to do the programs we're doing with a little more robust support, and with better communication to our families, our students, and our community. And when I'm talking about communication to families and students, I'm talking about doing that at an earlier age for the students. that we're doing a lot of that at 8th grade, 9th grade right now. We got to start looking at late elementary school. And so recommendations that this task force brought forward was another counselor to serve the fact that we've got more and more students. That's at the Bryan Community Focus Program, the one on 48th. Arts and Humanities over by Lincoln High, and the Science Focus Program at the zoo. One more counselor would really help us do that work and also help us communicate with those in the traditional high school settings about the focus programs that are available to them. The second one is another site-based leader. Again, as these programs grow, and you'll notice here I add the Bay, or the team added the Bay there because that's our newest focus program location. And as we grow to more sites, we're going to need more administration, making sure we're providing safety and security. The third bullet on this slide is the communications plan with recruiting events for focus programs. And remember, I'm talking about doing some of that even earlier than we've been doing it lately. The fourth bullet on this slide are investing time. We're trying to free up some of the leadership of this team to be able to do more of this, like Dr. Blake. Focus program access tools and processes for prospective students and parents. We have to see to it that parents of 5th grade students know what focus programs are available. That includes the career pathways in the Career Academy. Know which ones have college credit, which ones don't. How does transportation work? Do you get certification? Do you get college credit? What grade level do you start this? Are there prerequisites? All of these kinds of things need to be completely clear and available to our community. And we've got to do more work in that area. The final bullet on this slide is a strategic plan specific to the focus program. I want to call out the hard work of Josh Jones this year on the Career Academy strategic plan. We're not done with it yet, and that's, all strategic plans are a work in process, and he's done a great job with that. But we've got to do that all the way across all of our focus programs and make certain that every strategic plan area has a communications component involved. Without question, one of the largest things that's facing our challenges for the future is human resources. Obviously we're coming out of a global pandemic, probably involved in an endemic at this time. Workforce is so difficult right now. And there's two ways that I think of that challenge in workforce. One is to retain the great staff members that we have, and the other is to recruit and help grow future staff members in the future or in coming days. And so it's really important to us that we look in both of those areas. And it's also important when we talk about staffing in public schools that we don't just have everybody's brain go right to teachers, which is, obviously one of the most important working groups that we have, and they are such hardworking, and they're great partners to us, but we've got other positions as well that also have workforce shortages. Paraprofessionals, drivers, counselors, nurses, custodial staff, and operations staff, and on and on and on. So we've got to really take a look at this for our future. Board, this first slide on human resources talks about how we've begun to implement a number of things, but need to take it even further going forward. The first bullet, you gave us permission to do some substitute incentives, particularly with teachers, and particularly in hard-to-fill positions or hard-to-fill assignments. So we were able to discover there's a few out there, these are just kind of hard-to-fill assignments that are out there. Let's give them a little bit of a bump, and you permitted us to do so, where we gave them a slight increase in the dollar amount per day that they would receive, and that really worked. And we grew from 4 sites to 10 over the course of this year with your blessing. And we believe we need to keep that work going moving forward and maybe look even beyond just the teaching positions, which are really important, but also some of the others that I've mentioned. We, of course, have to do what we can to continue to interview and hire strong candidates early. The key word of bullet number 2 here is the word early. Large districts are notorious for hiring later than smaller, nimbler districts that have a little more nimble nature to them. And we've got to do everything we can to move as quickly as we can. And so in our case, we've been able to get some unassigned contracts hired where we don't even know necessarily will they'll be placed the next year, but we're moving earlier. And that's really important because we know there are great candidates that are out there. We've got to do more through the All Means All plan and others to strengthen current initiatives focused on increasing and retaining diverse staff. The fourth bullet on this slide is to work with the Nebraska Department of Education. They've done some great things in history to try to deal with the challenge of certification. We don't want teachers in this district that haven't earned certification. We don't want to lower the quality of instruction in this district. But we do have a lot of people in this community that have an incredible amount of expertise that might be ready for that second career. And if they could go through some simple process to learn about working with students and gain a certification that doesn't require them to set their job aside for 2 full years to go back to college to get a teaching degree, that we could be more successful more quickly with this. And so this is something I think we need to work on. The final recommendation from this team was to partner even better with the surrounding colleges and universities to nurture, to keep the top talent here in Lincoln. And through this, we've been talking, some of you know this, we've been talking about what will student teaching look like going forward. Some districts have begun to pay student teachers. Some have redesigned their program to make it last a full year, or to have it sliced up a little different so that the student teachers have some resources there. That's something we want to continue our work on as well. The final slide, as it relates to human resources, is something that we've begun on a very small level right now, would like to do it at a much larger level moving forward, which is to conduct stay interviews, or to interview current staff and retain them. We know that our current staff members, when we say, hey, what's it going to take to keep you here? What can we do to make your job feel so supported that you'll stick around with us? We know they're going to talk about money. We know they're going to talk about working conditions and planning time and things like that. But I would like to really dig deep, talking to all of our current staff members about that which we can do to make their positions more rewarding. And I can't overlook the fact that student behavior is the most often talked about thing by our staff members. And so the work I'm asking you to invest in related to student behavior so that we can improve instruction is really important. The second thing is an inadvertent occurrence. What I mean by this is something has occurred that no one planned to have occur over a many-year period, which is that if you're going to start teaching in the state of Nebraska and the only metric you're going to look at is teacher pay, you should start in the Lincoln Public Schools because we're the highest in the state on teacher pay. But when you comparatively look at teachers who are in their 15th year and beyond, really get to about the 20th year and beyond, because of some years of really tough budget decisions, budget freezes, pay, where we didn't move the step and that sort of thing, we have accidentally, inadvertently compressed our system a little bit. And so while you would be the highest paid in the state by being in that first year, you aren't necessarily, you're still pretty well paid comparatively being LPS in your 20th year. But I believe we should be at the top. I believe we should have ours be at the most competitive level we can make it. The third bullet on this page is focusing on partnering with SCC, with the University of Nebraska, with Wesleyan, with Doane, with Wayne State, with Peru State, with Kearney on a grow your own program. I envision something where maybe through our Career Academy, students are in our education pathway for 2 years. Maybe they go on to Southeast Community College, our great partners there, for 2 years. Maybe they move on to one of the other colleges I just mentioned in universities and for 2 years, and they come out with a teaching degree. They come right back here. We can solve our workforce shortage with our own great students, and we should plan on that. We have them in front of us. We know who's well suited for this kind of work. We should do everything we can to grow our own and support them to come right back to us and serve future students in this district. And to do that, I would like to recommend through the task force, the last bullet on this slide, which is that we've got to do a better job of connecting with students in our schools right now who want to become educators or work in the educational setting, and connect them with a path to get there for success. And so we'd like to add a coordinator to make that happen. The next part of this presentation is simply to share with you that I think it's time for us to take a look. This was something you asked me to do specifically, to take a look at the organizational structure in this district and consider whether that organizational structure is set up to suit us moving into the future. What I have in front of you, I know board members, you can probably see it on the screens in front of you, and community members that are out here, I'm sure you can't read every one of the words that are on here. I want to be clear that this is, look at the lower right-hand corner, this is our current organizational structure. What I've got here are 4 vertical lines, if you'll see those from the left to the right. A number of years ago, close to a decade ago, we actually had 5 vertical lines. And what I mean by that is, under the word superintendent in blue, there were 5 associate superintendents in this district. And by the way, back in those days, we had about 7,000 fewer students than we have today. 7,000 students in Nebraska is a large school district. We've grown by 7,000 and done so because of budgetary challenges by serving that with fewer people. But I've discovered something that I think is a bit of a challenge for our district moving forward, and it's directly related to the slides I presented to you earlier. On the far left-hand side, and again, board, I know you can see this, community, I know you can't, so I'm going to kind of cover this for you. I want to be very clear. Not every box on this slide is a single person. Some of them are departments. So you can't do a one-to-one count, right? But you have the Associate Superintendent for Human Resources. That's Dr. Price. And underneath there, you've got all of the departmental reports that serve that particular area, benefits and professional development and employee relations and personnel and recruiting and so on. The second from the left is the Associate Superintendent for Instruction. That's Dr. Larson. I think it important to note that that category is where we absorbed quite a bit of responsibility when we went from 5 associate superintendents to 4. But you'll notice we're talking about all things instruction, and I want to call your attention to the fact that we're also talking about all things student services and behavior. And if it is believed by most out there earlier in my presentation that yes, student behavior is that big of an issue right now, we've got to pay attention to student behavior so we can get to instruction and retain staff. We've got to take a look at this list because we've got curriculum instruction, early childhood, elementary ed. I'm not trying to skip anybody. I don't have my glasses on that read a distance, so I'm pulling out the words that I can from where I'm standing. The third one from the left is business services, Dr. Standish's area. And you'll notice all the things in there, and you certainly know that's how we're structured, budget and finance, operations, and so on. The fourth area is Dr. Neal's area, which is governmental relations and general administration. I believe that's the current title, general administration and governmental relations. And so athletics and activities and so on. On the right-hand side, you'll note that we have our technology officer, which serves it reports to the superintendent, and we have a position for director of diversity, equity, and inclusion that is not currently filled, but it's posted and we're underway of filling it, which also reports to the superintendent. And then on the far right side, in the dotted line, we have our own ESU in this district, ESU 18, and that's the administrator or superintendent, if you will, of the ESU. When you asked me the question as to should we make some organizational change here, I went right to research, and I partnered, was thankful that this district had already partnered with Hanover Research. And Hanover is the industry standard, I think, for educational research, particularly in K-12. They started in higher ed, but they do so much in K-12 education right now. And what we tried to do was look at the central office structure, because that was the question you asked, about the successful peer districts we have that are our size or larger. And I tried to cull from that. And board members, you all know, the community doesn't know this, but you read all of those reports yourself. I gave them to you. I'm not just summarizing them for you in 3 bullets here. Everyone's had the chance to read those reports. But as it came from Hanover Research, the things that struck me were these 3 bullets. Number 1, successful peer districts. Our size or larger, maybe close to our size or larger is a better way to say it. They have an executive leadership position with the primary role to oversee student behavior and student supports. Now, I want to call your attention to the fact that in our current leadership structure, where this is, that's all in that second category there. Student behavior and student supports is also under instruction. The second bullet, successful peer districts, our size or close to our size and larger, have an executive leadership position with the primary role to oversee teaching and learning. Separate, student behavior, student supports, teaching and learning. Of course, so many of those departmental areas on the previous slide could fit under either one. Let's talk about like early childhood. Is that student services, student behavior, or is that instruction and teaching and learning? The answer is yes, it's all of those things. What about special education? Do they deal with behaviors? Well, of course they do. But is that all they do? No, it's about teaching and learning, right? And so when you think about which one, is at the peak of this and then what departments do they serve, it's just interesting to me that successful peer districts have a focus on these two areas with a separate leader. The third one is that successful peer districts often integrate curriculum instruction and assessment into one department. If we were to combine our curriculum, instruction, and assessment work into one department, it saves us one reduction of a director level position, which opens up some FTE to consider changing the organizational structure just a little bit. And if I go to the next slide, what I'm trying to point out to you here is this is what I think this district needs for the future. And this is supported by the executive team and the task force groups that we've talked about. What I like to present to you here is that this is the proposed organizational structure moving forward. I think it's time for this district, for the reasons that I've already talked about, student behavior, focus on instruction and achievement, retention and recruitment of great staff members going forward, to talk about separating out the executive work of teaching and learning and educational services, for lack of a better term. So what I present to you here, on the left-hand side, the Associate Superintendent for Human Resources would be Dr. Price. That's much the same, that whole list. You'll notice that the second column is not as long as it once was because I'm looking to create more definition of leadership through here. So we would, if the board allows through the budget process later on, we would have an instructional division. You see those words at the top there? Instructional division that underneath it would serve the Associate Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, much like the position Dr. Larson holds right now, and it has those departmental areas underneath it, and a separate position for the Associate Superintendent for Educational Services, much like the department Dr. Larson leads now, and would have those departmental areas underneath it. I call your attention to this, board members. Everywhere along the line of discussing this and getting it ready for you, we've had people ask, well, why did you put that department under this row number 3, instead of row number 2? And the truth is, we could move these one way or the other because they all deal with some part of educational services and they all deal with some part of teaching and learning. Somebody out there could say, well, special education isn't just educational services, it's teaching and learning. Of course it is. But if we just say, well, let's move it to make people feel better all under teaching and learning, we're right back where we started again with a really long singular focus there. And I think it's time for us to divide our work here and focus. The one major change that I made from the 4th column on the right-hand side, which is business affairs, that's Dr. Standish's area right now, well, and in the future, sorry, I didn't mean to say that in a weird way, was to pull security out of there and move it under educational services. Because so much of our security work has been done focusing on student needs right now, and I think it's wise to pull it out of there. I also am a little concerned about the enormous amount of stuff that Dr. Standish and her department take care of. And so the 4th column from the right is, as I just described it. The 5th one is basically what Dr. Neal is doing right now. I've changed the title to civic engagement because to me that's far more what's going on than just governmental relations or just general administration. Under there, for those that can't see it, we've got activities and student athletics. We've got community learning centers, governmental relations, of course, the principal of this building, the teammates program, the wellness program. And then I pulled out only to identify here the executive director of communications. One thing we figured out during the pandemic was communications was at the center of every single thing we do. We've got an incredible leader in our team there, in Mindy Burbach, and yet we've got an incredible department that does so much with content creation and communicating with our parents and families every single day. I would like to pull that out from underneath John's line while still reporting to John and call it the Executive Director of Communications. We still have our Chief Technology Officer and our Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And of course, we will take care of the ESU 18 position with a certified superintendent as a part of that work, should the board accept this recommendation. I call your attention to this slide, which just reminds you that we've got all kinds of conversations coming forward. We don't have to decide any of this tonight. I'm not asking you to decide it tonight, just to receive it. We've got requests through our normal budget process, board committees, end of the year planning. We've got to partner with not only LEA, that's really important. I know Deb's in the room, but summer collaboration meetings with LEA, but also all of the other associations and work, meet and confer working groups that we work with. We got to let the negotiations process take place in the fall of 2023, because that's when we're next up for that. And then the strategic plan. I want to mention this. We'll bring added focus. Somebody might ask after seeing this report, well, which is the strategic plan? What you presented or what the group's going to come up with? I would say it's what the group's going to come up with, hopefully embedding some of the things that I've recommended to you here this evening. This document I know you've seen before. Community members, you may not have seen it, but I'm calling your attention to the very top of it, which is that in March through June, we're going to do, which is what we're in right now, we're going to do the preliminary analysis of getting ready for our strategic planning timeline, which includes our new partnership with DMG to create a strategic plan. We have an ad hoc strategic planning group that's been formed to do that work. The second arrow from the left is to develop a draft plan for community input. I know how important community input is, not only to you board members, but also to our community, and that'll occur between June and October. The third arrow, if you will, is to develop the strategic plan. That's October through February, and then we hope that about a year from now, we'll be able to begin implementing a draft of that strategic plan and communicating that and moving that forward. I call your attention to the lower right corner of this document, which, just as a reminder, every one of these slides that has an asterisk has more documentation in the addendums. And with that, I would take comments and feedback.
Dr. Gosman, thank you for this very thorough presentation. We've seen it before. We've had a lot of, we've had opportunities to ask some questions before, but I will open it up to my board colleagues for comments and questions. And let's start with Mr. Boswell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayhew. So knowing that we're not going to get into the weeds tonight,
Sure.
We're not going to get into the details or the merits of your recommendations, and through the lens of the goals that we put or that we developed together collaboratively at our summer retreat last year, I just want to share, it's my opinion that you've met that goal. We asked you to transition into the district by meeting with people in the community, by visiting buildings and meeting with staff, talking with students and parents. And I've heard from a lot of people in the community that they enjoy meeting with you, that they're glad you're here. And so let me also say, I'm glad you're here. Thank you. We asked you to come back to us with what you saw, what you heard, and recommendations, and you've definitely done that. So that's why I believe that the goal is met. I also, specific things that I appreciated in your presentation is that you included a review of current initiatives, particularly like when doing strategic plans. Sometimes all people talk about is what's new, but it's important to realize we have a lot of ongoing things as well. I also appreciate that the themes that I heard tonight, the findings that you have are consistent with things that we've seen, things that came up in discussions of the equity plan, things that came up even through community initiatives like Prosper Lincoln. So there's nothing in here really that is surprising to us. That said, we also know that we're not going to be able to do everything that's in this plan. That's why they're recommendations and not an operational plan. But I look forward to the process moving forward through our budget process, through our strategic planning process, through our community work, to evaluate these recommendations and to continue to collaborate with you and your team to determine which of these things will move forward, how will they move forward. The question that I have for you is, as we do that, what are the opportunities for members of both our staff within LPS and with the larger community to provide feedback into the things that they've heard tonight?
Yeah, you know, I continue to meet with our staff members in a little more formalized group, but every time I've met with a staff group, I give them an opportunity to give me feedback, not just at that moment and verbally, but later. And I try to do it in a way, because I know our staff members are so busy, to not tax them too much, but to just open a Google document or open a common input document that we all can add things to together, but to assure them that I am personally reading all of those submissions And I'm frankly, you know, up until now, I've been coding them and categorizing them myself, not because we don't have an incredible Department of Assessment here that could do that work. They can do it better than I can. But I felt like early in my time here, it was so important for me to do that. I pride myself on being very accessible, whether that be through, you know, my cell phone, the email, the you know, community groups that I meet with, you know, whatever. And so I just encourage people to reach out, and I will get back with them, and we'll do everything we can to learn what their interests are. And I do understand, you know, like I think through great partnerships that we have. And, you know, like I talked about, like early childhood as an example. I'll just use that as an example. You know, we know that Lincoln Littles is a great partner. We know that EduCare is a great program within this district as an example. We know that moving forward, we're probably going to work together to get it done. Will we do it exactly as I've outlined here? I think that's dictated a bit by the board, by the budget, by timing, maybe some of the things we can't do for the next 3 years, but then we could consider them. I'm open-minded to any of that, just using that as an example.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mrs. Danig?
Thank you, Mr. Mayhew. Very good report, a lot to digest, and leaves me with something you addressed when you said you had a living, breathing Google Doc. I was thinking of a rolling FAQ, so and probably divided by the 4 areas that you have, especially as staff members or communities may put something on a district website. Maybe
Sure.
we could have a list of those questions put together.
Sure.
And an answer to those questions so that somebody could look at them and not ask the same question consistently over and over again, asked and answered, because I think there are a lot of people that will look at it and come up with some of the same ideas. Some will have ways to improve it, and we can learn a lot by having a place that we can file and review and share questions and answers.
I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that.
Other comments? Dr. Honor?
Yeah, I'd say it fits with what I hear from the community too. The teachers, they talk about the student behaviors, the young parents talk about child education. And then I think getting into the structure that runs it all, I think the biggest thing that the community learns is the more deeper you get into LPS is just the scale of it. It's when it's in session, it's equivalent to our 4th largest city in the state, Grand Island, complete with its own transportation, nutrition, security, everything. And so I think it is helpful to look at it like, do we have the right structure to support that size of a group? So thanks.
Thank you for that.
Mrs. Mugard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayhew. I think when we made this goal, we were really looking for fresh eyes, and fresh eyes coming from into the community as well. And I really feel that you took that to heart, that was what we are asking for you to take a really deep look and a fresh look at who we are and what we are and how we operate. And you have given us a ton to think about. Like that Lanny said, nothing really very new. None of this is like, oh, I wish we had thought of that. But there are a lot of, we hadn't thought of it in that way. And that's really the fresh part and the way of like us to come back to some of these issues and need to come forward. And that is really refreshing. One thing I just want to say is that also when we made this goal, we were really worried about the timeline. I think we spent more time discussing, is this possible if we give this to you in this timeline versus should this be done? And I congratulate you on using the amazing staff we have to make it possible. I think that shows a really strength of not only how we are built as LPS, but how you have come in and right away as a superintendent use that to help us have those fresh eyes. So I really respect that and appreciate that, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you. If I might respond to that, I was going to end this evening the way I began, but I think it's appropriate to say it now because of Annie Mumgard's comments. I wanted to call attention to all of the incredible leaders and the depth of leadership in this district in terms of putting this report together. You know, the Human Resources report was led by Dr. Price. The Early Childhood was led by Dr. Lucas Richt. Dr. Blake I mentioned already. Josh Jones with the TCA I mentioned already. I'm trying to think what other groups. Dr. Larson did a whole lot of this that was on there. I'm missing one, aren't I? Oh, yes, Dr. Brian Zabawa in the student behavior piece, because that was a really large component and a good-sized group that did all of that. Thank you, Dr. Larson, for that. And then, of course, my colleagues that are up here that I haven't mentioned in Dr. Neal and Dr. Standish. The strength of this district is in the depth of the leaders who serve that at all levels, in transportation, in operation, everything. And so this wasn't my report, this was our report this evening. Thank you.
Other comments? I will just say very briefly, I won't go through all the things that other people said that I agree with, but I do think, Paul, that you did exactly what we asked you to do. That the work is evident. Clearly, you were listening very hard. I think the themes that you came up with are spot on, and as has been mentioned, reconciles with the things that we're hearing on our building visits or from the phone calls or emails that we get. Focus on student behavior. We know that that's important. Focus on early childhood. These are very important things and themes, and I'm glad that they figured prominently in your report. A couple of other things I would say. I love that this is data-driven. That everything you're doing is recommending is based on best practices and research and what other districts are doing that is working well. There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel. And also the mention of collaboration. I think that one of this district's big strengths is our collaboration with our community partners and looking for more opportunities and solutions with the resources and the intelligence that we have out in the community, I think serves us very well. So thank you for that. If there are no other comments or questions on this, then I will thank Dr. Gosman for his report and note that this will